E vamos iniciar.
So let's start the Q&A period with one of the most important topics, not because of the fact it's very complex, but because it's very rapid in evolution and change. So let's take a look at the tokenization of the real economy. What is it? The legal implications, the opportunities that exist, what will happen in terms of change in our practical life, in our day-to-day life, and where do we stand in Portugal concerning one of these one of the world trends of the economy? And to speak about tokenization, our keynote speaker is Paulo Cardoso do Amaral, assistant professor at the Catholic Lisbon University. Good morning and welcome.
Obrigado, João. Bom dia a todos.
So, good morning, everyone. Thank you, President of the Congress. Thank you, PhD Xavier. I will speak to you about value creation. So we need to create wealth so as to be successful. As a professor in the Catholic University, I'm going to give you a lecture on blockchain. No, I'm going to speak to you about the economic value of tokens. This is a token that I liked, a 500 Shkuro note, which I thought was very nice at that time. What's its value? What's the money value, what it represents, but much more. The ability we have to make an economy more efficient. What would happen to our economy without tokens that would allow us to say that this is the right to spend, the right I have to spend value? Of course, we're not here to speak about physical topics, but we're here to speak about technology. Technology changed our life. And starting with the computers, larger computers that started to change how companies work. But the main economic value creation had to do with PCs. And many of you remember these PCs in your youth, but more when everybody's connected. That is, computer, mobile phone, everything allowing a simpler, more efficient experience from that value coming from economy, regardless of what its value. The way we can pay, in a simple way. Before, when we used money, we have other methods of payment, and transactions are more efficient. They have an economic value. Recently, I traveled to China. I was in China, and I was quite surprised because before and after the pandemic, China is a completely different country. No one lives in China, where I was, without a smartphone. Nobody lives. You can't go to a restaurant or even pay your metro ticket without a smartphone. And then the question, what has happened for that after the pandemic? What happened that after the pandemic, China had changed, shifted so much? And using smartphones, technologies was part of that integrating aspect of people's life. It's convenient. It's easier to use a smartphone, QR code, and I'm very lazy, and it's easier. Being easier makes it more interesting. So I wanted to make that introduction. That is, if I'm going to speak about blockchains and new technology, what we are interested in is not the value of the crypto weird thing. What we're interested in is how this technology, what will be connected to opportunity, how blockchain smart contracts have what is different, and how our life will change from now on. The main shift goes through that image, which is many things are no longer necessary, will no longer be managed by specific entities. There is a technology which is self performable that can carry out transactions for all. And so instead of having different points, controlling points, as we have today in particular companies and people among themselves will make transactions, create economic value, we'll be able to count on a technology that can make transactions for all. So how is this different? That's the question. How is it different? Well, in my opinion, this is going to be the beginning of a new industrial revolution for two reasons. Because for many transactions, as it happened with the web, the transaction decreasing cost is so big that it will create disruption in establishing new businesses that happen with web with more strength. What we'll be seeing in next years, I've been giving lectures in that sense. At this moment, it's accelerating. So what we will see is the advantages that will exist for companies and other organizations in change, transformation of the economic fabric, which will create many opportunities. And this is what we call disruption. Now, what is the path? It started by being a topic which was quite a controversial one called decentralized finance. And it started with the Bitcoin. This I'm not going to speak about that topic. I'm not interested in value reserves represented by cryptocurrency. It's very interesting. I've learned quite a lot, but the challenge is a tremendous innovation, understanding how we can use this technology. And the idea now is to transport it to what is our daily life, where there's economic creation in a real economy. So, what we're interested in is managing property right, management of property right. And it's managed in our economy with context we know as legal and regulatory. So for this technology to have an impact, it has to go through, and those can't think that they'll be that all transactions will be received. It's up because DeFi has its function essentially is anonymous, where our privacy is managed anonymously. And many people like this aspect. It's possible in DeFi and unregulated context, but it's not possible in the real economy. We cannot let assets with value, such houses and cars and other rights, are in the hands of a privacy which is anonymous. We can maintain that privacy, but without anonymity. So the difference between managing property rights today and property rights with the technology supported by blockchain addresses that challenge. I can say that being anonymous does not mean it has to be. We have ways of using the Delphi technology by maintaining privacy, but assuring that there's no anonymity. This is what we need to do as today for all our daily transactions. So everything will go through, all this will go through an evolution, a transformation of what are economic activities in a regulated economy. In the regulated economy. And this is my keynote, that is looking at blockchain technology, smart contract, not only in terms of cryptocurrency. Let's put them aside. Let's look at this technology, how it can be useful in our daily life, in our normal economic activities that will be transforming, and always thinking that a conveniency that I spoke is behind what we want. If it's outside the legal system or anything else that we're not interested, it's not interested. So we want the opposite. We want, obviously, the legal aspects and what is appropriate. Now, what is the path? Each geopolitical space is finding its path. Switzerland is way ahead. The States also. China is way, way ahead. And it would probably give origin to another keynote. We can learn from Switzerland and China. We can learn from these countries. But Europe recently said what it would be doing. So in regulation, going back to property right, so two European regulation. One, which will be enforced next year, was already signed, entered into, and another TLT. We're speaking about MiCA. I'm not going to give you a lecture on the MiCA regulation, but this is giving rise to many discussions. MiCA is a regulation which handles the fee. What does that mean? It means it gives it legal coverage and protection to investors. And since investment is in their feet, creating economic value in new areas which are not regulated, I'm not interested in it right now. The second part on the right-hand side of the mica, which is giving rise to next year to creating a euro non-digital euro as stable coin instead of being in a bank account, crypto format, in circulation by the bank. We have a lot of digital euros in our accounts. The difference is that they have this format. By being in that format, they will increase efficiency because transactions become simpler. Instead of using passwords or using a debit card, I can use QR codes for everything as it's being done. It's interesting at that level. Where's the beginning of this change in property rights? This will be discussed by the members of my panel, Pilot DLT. It was signed last year and it was enforced 2 months ago. What is Pilot DLT? What is it? It's a first approach in using tokens, blockchain tokenization, for shares, bonds, and other special funds. And this enables the property right that we have on a company through shares can be tokenized. By being it, since we have a 500 euro bill, we can transact it even easier. Means that this property rights, companies that are tokenized, for instance, with real estate, we can have secondary markets that we could not have before. Secondary markets in real time, available, ready, so that the economy can become more efficient. And if assets are used efficiently, then we will create economic value. If assets are more used for my car is stopped. DLT pilot is the first step Europe is giving in so that we can start moving real assets. That is from the company side with things, and that is the debt side as well, like bonds. It's only the beginning. It's at an onset. So what we want to happen afterwards, clearly what Switzerland did, and which was overlooked, that is the change of its financial law so that all financial products can use that technology. Imagine the opportunity, the disruption that will be created in the financial infrastructure, that is bank and financial activities. It will not happen tomorrow, but it will happen. This is what will happen in Europe. But the financial sector is just the subtract of the management of all other levels, sectors of the economy. So after the financial sector, we will start by thinking in the tokenization of real assets and any other right. When this happens, that is how we make business will be simpler, with fewer risks, with fewer courts. No, the courts will not disappear. The jurists will even have more work. Courts will not disappear. And this is how we create economic value, the same way that traditional technology creates economic value, because transactions decrease and our transactions are simpler. And in that case, we're speaking of transactions at the ecosystem level. Forget the processes. We have processes in companies that intersect, and with blockchain, the process becomes one transaction. What is the settlement sector, which takes 5 days, will be done in real time. By decreasing the transaction cost, there will be, of course, markets like the web as a result of such. So this is going to be the path. This is how the road is being paved. And this means that, in spite of the fact that I'm a technologist, More and more, I'm concerned, and this is in good sense with the law. I'm concerned. Nothing is possible without changing the law. Nothing of this will be possible if we do not change the law. We can only make a step forward if the law manages property rights. If I want to tokenize a property today, it's not possible, but I can tokenize a share of a company that owns the real estate because the law allows me to do the pilot DLT. But one day it's going to be the property that can be tokenized and recognized by the state as such as the usufruct or any other type of right. This transformation will be the main disruption that I hope I'll be able to see as we have done with the web. Now, how are property rights being managed? These are my two last keynotes. It's because the law works with accountability. There's always someone held accountable for what is happening. For instance, a bank is liable for the reserves, liable before society. But if the money is tokenized, it's going to be more difficult. Leaves the bank, it's more difficult because of the anonymity versus privacy. How is Europe solving it? It's saying we're going to place euros under the accountability of a bank. No, your customer will manage it, and this means that, such as in a banking account, we have a custodian. The way the form they found to solve using these technologies that could be anonymous, solve problems where we don't want them to be anonymous, so that the property is well managed, is in spite of using that technology, we continue with custodians. That is, the banks will have stable coins. Entities building secondary share markets also are accountable for these transactions. And this is what is happening. There's always someone held accountable, and this is what has been happening. Disruption. If there is disruption, we cannot. We still need the law. This is not the final solution. I'm just going to give you a bit of a flavor of what's going to happen after the tokenization based on law and custodian. So if today we have a function which will re-centralize in a certain way, will rescind the property rights through entities which are responsible for transactions regardless of using the blockchain technology, the fact of doing it, in spite of having the re-centralization of rights, there will be an ecosystemic change, which is significant with quite a lot of opportunities. It works with ecosystem. It's no longer the traditional system. It's an ecosystem one. What will be the next step of this balance of the different entities involved? Are we waiting for the financial infrastructure supporting the economy to change because of the fact that these transactions are simpler? We no longer need so many processes. We have smart contracts with the known characteristics, and that will, in spite of this direction, will there be another form? Will there be another way of solving the problem? And then the question is if the law can be self-implemented without custodian. Let me say that the answer is yes, but I would probably need another keynote. And since we're still at an early stage, I hope I can still explain to you how it will be done. But until then, we're seeking competitive advantages because companies with disruptions, transaction change, have opportunities. There will be opportunities for them, and with the DLT, this is also happening, and what will follow, as I've mentioned, because people also have opportunities, and economies, geopolitical spaces have an opportunity. And this is why I read Michael Porter's book some years ago on the competitive advantage. The geopolitical space can gain economic value just because the economy has become more efficient. Nobody's speaking about buying cryptocurrency, but using technologies as database, as the web, and as blockchain is emerging. And this is quite true because China last week, this is really true. It made one more step that I've been waiting for the last 3 or 4 years, made one step since, and in addition to the digital year that started 2 years ago, they already have the euro, like the euro digital. They've already have it. They've had it for the last 2 years. It's been tested. The step they did was let's transform the yen digital. Let's transform our currency into e-commerce one. BNP Paribas also provides as euros digital currency. If you want to do business, use our bank because we use that broad money. So to either guarantees or transactions and fees in that process be as easy as a transfer values with big bitcoins, not to China but anywhere else in the world, anywhere else, with all entities involved. So in this case, we're not speaking about bitcoins but broad money. And I wouldn't be surprised if China, in its international transactions with its partners, no longer needs the dollar. So think about what this can lead to in terms of impact, balance, the geopolitical space of China looking for its competitive advantage. And I hope that our jurists, I'm not a jurist, but I'm ready to help out our jurists, that they are available, and our rulers as well, to change, to amend the law in a secure, efficient way, to embrace these technologies so that our own geopolitical space within Europe is ours, is our corner, can also seek that competitive advantage because it's also possible. Wishing you a very productive Congress.
Obrigado nós ao professor Paulo Cardoso.
Thank you, Professor Paulo Cardoso Amaral, who shared with us this perspective, a glance into the future, or better, a glance into the present that is more present than we imagine. And we will try to understand better everything that has been said. And we are in Portugal, in Europe, and there was a tokenization of the economy. Our guests, Inês Drummond, Deputy Chair of the CMVM, the Portuguese SEC, and Nuno Rodrigues, Head of New Business Organization Structuring IO Builders. Nuno, let me start with you. Where do we stand? The tokenization of the economy already exists in Portugal, in Spain, and how? João, before directly answering your question, I would like to say the two following things. First, what is tokenization that we are here talking about today? It is the digital representation of an asset which has a given intrinsic value, and as soon as it assumes this new format, we can do business with this token or transfer it in a blockchain. My second comment is that currently tokenization is one of the main instruments at the service of the banking sector and fintech sector within the scope of this digital transformation we're witnessing in the financial sector. So this generically, but what about Portugal, Spain, and the EU? Well, jumping into your question, we have witnessed several tokenization initiatives carried out in the last few years by several entities, and the main purpose was basically to test the blockchain technology. Secondly, to test the use of the so-called smart contracts, managing the entire life cycle of these tokenized digital assets. And also the impact these new formats have in the internal processes of these entities, namely in their relationship with their stakeholders. Last but not least, the objective of these entities is also to assess and measure the economic and financial feasibility of these initiatives. Well, the initiatives are very wide-ranging. The tokenization of money, banking money tokenized, the tokenization of bonds, and also in units of investment funds, but also the tokenization of digital art, the so-called NFTs, non-fungible tokens. And the last example is the tokenization of carbon rights. And this can be used in the market by businesses to offset their environmental footprint. Are there companies already actively doing this tokenization, or because it's so new and complex, only big businesses can aspire to do so? The common denominator to all these initiatives are initiatives led by financial institutions and managers of assets. There's yet another important aspect. These entities that I've just mentioned, they already have in their own organizations specific departments of digital assets, and they have teams strategically thinking about this topic, studying new technologies, new business models. But we're still talking about large businesses, in particular in the financial sector, more than in the real estate sector, although these two sectors are connected. But before going to Inês, we've heard about anonymity and privacy, two entirely different things. And we're going to discuss the national law, the European law, the transposition of the European law. I ask, is this a gray area where it's easier to commit fraud and do money laundering? Regarding this aspect, which is crucial, the initiatives we are in favor of is a regulated world. As Professor Paulo Moral mentioned, we are focusing our initiatives and projects in the regulated world. As such, there's a concern, and that is to identify who are the possible investors in this type of platforms, and also regarding the prevention of money laundering. What is important is that technology is absolutely transparent. Everything is registered, and it is almost impossible to falsify a register. So both regulators and audit companies can have access to the information and can see all the transactions and the owners of those tokens. Inês, even though this legislation is not approved and defined, there's a transition period, is it more difficult to carry out the supervision of this type of transactions, or should we believe it will be easier to detect any type of misbehavior, or to consider that this concept self-supervises itself? A correction. This regulation is already in force. We're talking about the DLT regulation. When we talk about crypto assets, which are financial instruments, and when we talk about this regime, it's already in force. There's no need for the regulation to be subject to a transposition. The enforcement is direct in the several member states. There's only missing a diplomat at national level to change some very specific parts of the real estate code. And what depends on the national law, these very minor changes need to be conducted. So what it does in the area of financial services, the establishing of market infrastructures, enabling the transactions, the settlement of shares, bonds, which are issued, held in DLT. Because the conclusion is that it's already possible to issue the DLT financial instruments, and there are DLT issuings, and I cannot mention private companies, but there are European Investment Bank issuing of DLTs. But when we're talking about this type of assets, all the entire law on financial instruments was applicable, but there was no secondary market. I'm not an example, but if one of us as a company to issue DLT shares knows that these shares are sold, and if Nuno buys them in the future, you want to trade them, and there's a disincentive if the secondary market does not exist. And with this regulation, there's the possibility of having this secondary market, enabling some exemptions to the current law, namely at the European level. So if a company today in the secondary market wanted to move forward, or could they do so, or should they wait? Well, there is in fact this detail. Some member states are more advanced. In Spain, for example, they have already amended the national law, so the regulation is fully enforced. In Portugal, we still have, as I've said, to change the code on securities and to change this some of infrastructures. But basically, the conclusion is that European law was not designed to take into account these new technologies. So we didn't have a technological neutrality and legal certainty. So some very surgical amendments are needed, and taking into account what you've mentioned before, that we should not forget about AML or other aspects. It is expected that businesses can issue and then benefit from the secondary market. Before giving the floor to Nuno, my first question: does this make your work easier or harder to make sure that everything is done in a legal manner? Well, it will be different. I don't know if it will be easier or harder, but it will most certainly be different. The competent authority should authorize these infrastructures in the market, so we will need all the necessary information to provide such authorizations with the exemptions that the competent authority believes should be considered. Then, regarding ongoing supervision, oversight, so that all requirements are met, this is foreseen in the regulation itself, that the supervisor will have access in a more automated and faster way to the information. But we ourselves will need to adapt, because this information will arrive to us in a different way. So I would say it will be different, but not necessarily harder. And we will have the same concerns. We'll be here because we are all learning. Nuno, in Spain, they are more advanced in the adaptation of the law. What about businesses? Are they joining this world when there's the law and when there's the possibility? Is this an attractive way of doing business? The big novelty introduced by this pilot regime with this regulation is the possibility to issue financial assets that are born already tokenized. And since these assets already exist, they can be traded in the secondary market in the same way, in simplicity, as we buy a share or a bond in the traditional stock exchange, for example, at Euronext. So, all initiatives that involve the issuing of shares, bonds, or units in investment funds to be tokenized, they fit into this type of project. So what we are witnessing is a very high level of interest among companies in certain activity sectors where capital needs is very relevant. So it's where we will have this type of initiatives. Can we think about a more extended context? You've mentioned art, communication, whatever. Well, there's a lot of interest among companies in economic activity sectors where the financing needs are relevant, namely real estate or renewable energies. We are already working in specific platforms for these sectors, 100% devoted to the real estate sector, and realtors can structure their financial products and they can develop their own projects. On the other hand, this type of platforms can be used by entities that own real estate that generates already gains. And this is a very interesting way to monitor these assets that are already productive assets. I don't know if this question is for Nuno or Inês, but I'll ask the question to Inês. To which extent do banks become superfluous? This idea to get rid of intermediaries, the banking sector will have to realize this tokenization of the economy. I believe the banking sector will always play a very important role regarding the financing of businesses, but it's always an intermediary, a go-between. Yes, the intermediation function in the capital market between the client and these market infrastructures, the role will be definitely lighter, because all the back office structure that was needed no longer will be needed, because we have these contracts that enable the solving of these matters. What I believe this initiative brings about, and it's also positive for the banking sector, is that there's a new, simple, efficient way to have access to the capital market. We're starting with a pilot exercise. It's a pilot exercise because it's temporary with one of the simplest financial instruments, shares, bonds, and units in investment funds. Of course, we can then develop to other financial instruments, but this will enable something which is very relevant for the Portuguese companies, but also for the European ones, to have easier access to the capital market, and therefore the financing structures will be more balanced than today, and that's positive for the banking sector. More capitalized companies that resort to the capital market, or companies that can have a financing structure that is more robust, and the banking sector also benefits from this. Nuno, we're talking about the banking sector. To which extent are banks adapting? Well, all initiatives, and these ones in particular that I've mentioned, targeting the real estate sector and the renewable energy sector, the participant is a financial entity that plays a crucial role. First, the purpose and the financial entity is responsible for all the regulatory reporting that takes place in the platform, activities in the primary and secondary markets, as long as these platforms are licensed. So the banks in this type of initiatives where we are involved has a very fundamental role and is always present. but and this makes faster and more direct. There are several intermediaries, and we consider that the banking sector plays a crucial role because of the capacity to attract institutional investors. Traditionally, they are used to interact with banks, and what they need is to have access to new opportunities, and investment opportunities make sense. Inês, something that us and companies don't like are taxes. And how is this taxed? How can you fight tax evasion? Because this doesn't sound as physical. So in theory, it's easier given the possibilities that exist. Let me say that this is related to tokenization of financial instruments, and what we are doing. So everything that concerns financial instruments, and I'm not from the tax authority, will be applicable to this type of transactions because the exemptions do not include the fiscal part. It is the possibility of disintermediation that you've mentioned, so that the client can more easily have access to a platform. Namely, that not only central bank is used, central bank currency is used, but also tokenized currency. But this does not have an impact on the tax level. Okay, but this is also a concern, and we need to pay attention so that we don't end up solving a problem later on. We need to make a brief break, coffee break. What are the opportunities that this brings about? I think that above all, what we will witness is a very important transition, and we will go from a more rigid economy into a more fungible liquid economy, and there will be the possibility to have access to financial products, and this will bring about simplicity, not only from the viewpoint of the investor, but also across the entire life cycle of the product with automation, transparency, and I believe this is what entrepreneurs are considering, and they are trying to understand how their businesses can develop into this new reality and this new world that is here to stay, apparently. Nuno Rodrigues, Inês Drummond, thank you so much. This is indeed new and complex, but we cannot miss the train. Thank you again. We had some hints, and this is one of the topics of the big disruption that is happening in the world and also in the economy, and this is the main topic of this 32nd APDC Congress, disruptions. We will have a brief break. We'll be back in 15 minutes. Thank you.